2020 has been a very bumpy ride so far. There's been a global pandemic, worldwide economic turmoil, extreme military tensions, and don't forget those murder hornets. How could it get worse? Well, what if we were hit by 2 pandemic-level viruses at once? Sounds like a twisted joke, right? But as it turns out, 2020 might be about to get a lot worse, because a new virus has just emerged in China that experts are describing as having pandemic potential. Stay tuned to find out what exactly the new virus is, who's responsible, and what, if anything, we can do about it. Toward the end of June 2020, reports started emerging from China about a new virus with deeply disturbing potential. This newly identified virus is a specific strain of influenza, which is a virus you probably know better by its casual name, the flu. Influenza comes in many varieties, ranging from the common flu to avian flu, and most significantly in this case, swine flu. It's this final category that the new virus falls into. Swine flu is a type of influenza that mostly affects pigs, hence the name. But like many viruses, certain strains can be passed over to humans who come into contact with infected animals or consume infected meat. The world saw this happen on a massive scale back in 2009 when a swine flu pandemic swept the world on an unprecedented scale. This pandemic led to an estimated 284,000 deaths, and around 1 in every 4 people throughout the world are thought to have been infected during the pandemic's duration. If the influenza had been more destructive and lethal in its symptoms, you can imagine how much more devastating it could have been. And if this new strain ends up being as dangerous to humans, or worse, than the strain behind the previous pandemic, we're in serious trouble. The world of 2020 is in a much worse position to deal with a swine flu outbreak than the world of 2009. With COVID-19 still sapping medical resources and devastating economies, if this new virus happens to reach infection rates anything like the 2009 outbreak, the effects could be almost unimaginable. So what do we actually know about this new strain? Well, for starters, its full name is G4EA-H1N1. But let's just call it G4 for short. The virus's existence became apparent during recent analysis of 30,000 swabs and tissue samples of pigs from 10 provinces of China. From these samples, 179 cases of swine flu were observed, with the majority belonging to the newly identified G4 strain. Worse, analysis revealed that cases of G4 among Chinese livestock have been growing at an alarming rate, showing a sharp increase since 2016. We know it's rapidly becoming more common, but what exactly makes it dangerous? The danger lies in the fact that this variant of influenza holds traits from several different varieties of the virus. Some of these varieties, making up the core of the virus, are avian influenza variants, to which humans have no immunity. The new virus also includes traits from mammalian strains of influenza, which bring greater risk of human infection. Now, this wouldn't usually mean all that much in itself, seeing as there are more than 130 strains of influenza, and only a handful of these actually affect humans. But don't breathe a sigh of relief just yet, because this strain is one of the few that does. Alarmingly, cases have begun emerging of humans being infected by the G4 virus, which means it is now able to transfer from animal to human. The virus has also been observed adeptly infecting and replicating itself in human airways, and it only seems to be growing more efficient at doing so. While this is concerning in itself, thankfully, there's yet to be any known cases of human-to-human transfer. That being said, there's one thing that has scientists worrying most of all. The main point of concern is that the disease shares a lot of its genes with the H1N1 strain that caused the 2009 swine flu pandemic. This has led some scientists to theorize that these shared genes may promote an adaptation into human-to-human transfer. On the chance that this does start happening, and human-to-human infection is proven possible, we could have a serious problem on our hands. If G4 hits before the COVID-19 crisis is over, we're talking 2 full-blown pandemics, all at the same time. It's not completely out of the question, as swine flu has taken humanity by surprise in the past. No one really knew about the H1N1 strain responsible for the last swine flu pandemic until it started infecting people at an alarming rate. We can only hope that a human-to-human transferring G4 is not one of 2020's remaining surprises. So how do we prevent these few cases evolving into a full-scale pandemic? And how did new viruses like G4 emerge in the first place? Well, according to researchers from China Agricultural University, China Animal Health and Epidemiology Center, and Iowa State University, much of it comes down to China's deeply troubling livestock practices. Studies have found that while China shares common weaknesses found in livestock farming industries all over the world, its problems are more pronounced than most. Lacking systems of administration and enforcement, inconsistent oversight of producers, and all too common failings of accountability, serious health, safety, and hygiene issues regularly slip through the cracks. This, coupled with severely lacking rates of testing and insufficient scientific analysis of livestock health, allow infections to spread rapidly throughout China, as we're now seeing with G4. But the most concerning aspect of China's livestock industry is the chance of new, even deadlier diseases emerging and transferring to humans. These types of diseases could prove more devastating than anything we've seen before, taking on forms and levels of aggressiveness that the world is wholly unprepared to deal with. And as for the question of where exotic diseases like these emerge, all too often, the answer lies in exotic wildlife markets. You've likely heard that coronavirus is widely thought to have originated in China's exotic wildlife markets, sometimes referred to as wet markets. But what exactly is a wet market, and why are they so dangerous? To put it simply, Chinese wet markets are marketplaces that feature live animals for sale. These places can be incredibly unhygienic, and in many countries, the conditions would be classified as animal abuse. Cages are stacked high, allowing animals' bodily fluids to flow down to the lower cages, making the risk of infection and sickness incredibly high. These unsanitary conditions are bad enough, but the real danger comes from exotic wildlife, like pangolins, bats, and bears, that are also sold at certain markets of this kind. These wildlife specimens, or at least parts of their bodies, are heavily promoted as tonic products, with unsubstantiated claims of things like improving muscles, helping fertility, and ironically, fighting disease. These non-domesticated animals in unsanitary conditions bring the risk of new diseases to which livestock have no resistance, allowing the chance of rapidly spreading infections, which may ultimately transfer to humans. But there's an even darker truth to China's wildlife markets and the diseases that emerge from them. You see, the majority of the Chinese public aren't particularly interested in spending all their hard-earned cash on expensive, exotic animals for niche, pseudo-scientific benefits. In fact, the general public are the ones who tend to speak out against the practices. It's the wealthy elite who have a taste for products of this kind. But despite these tastes being confined to such a small percentage of the population, the people with these appetites for the exotic hold enormous political influence in China. With the enormous lobbying power afforded by their wealthy clientele, exotic wildlife farming groups have been able to pressure the Chinese government into repeatedly repealing laws restricting the practices. What's worse, this usually happens after an exotic animal-caused disease outbreak among the public emerges, and it always follows the same pattern. People get sick, the public gets angry, temporary laws are passed. Then, once the hype has died down, those laws are quietly repealed, and the process starts again. The tastes of the wealthy are satisfied as a priority by the government at the cost of public health. Only now that a global pandemic has emerged is China discussing implementing some serious, permanent changes, including closing down thousands of wet markets. But will the measures last, or will they be repealed and forgotten when the dust settles, like so many times before? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm genuinely interested what you have to say, so I'll be reading and replying to some of you. It seems the best chance we have at preventing G4 and similar new diseases from becoming serious global problems is to overhaul how the Chinese government controls its livestock trades. But realistically, China's track record doesn't exactly inspire hope. So aside from clamping down on China's and more broadly the world's meat trades, is there any other way to stop future pandemics of influenza and similar diseases? Well, most signs point to yes, just not quite yet. Researchers at China Agricultural University stress the importance of producing a human G4 vaccine, so it's ready to go if we need it. But this will take time and resources, and considering we've already got a pandemic underway, neither of those things are readily available. But as Martha Nelson, an evolutionary biologist at the U.S. National Institutes of Health, has noted, viruses have no interest in whether we're already having another pandemic. In other words, viruses don't care about your problems. If they're coming, they're coming. So we need to do what we can to be prepared. If another one strikes and we're not prepared, the effects could be felt for decades. Luckily, humans have been working on a few other things that should come in handy. At least in countering the G4 virus, should it prove to be a serious threat. Universal flu vaccines are currently being developed with the aim of allowing our bodies to resist influenza in most, if not all, of its different forms. Some of these use specialized antibodies to neutralize various forms of the virus, while others stimulate our white blood cells into destroying virus-infected cells. By targeting proteins inside the influenza virus that don't vary substantially from strain to strain, these modified cells should theoretically act universally across most variants of influenza. On top of that, thanks to considerable progress at places like Oxford University and Massachusetts-based biotech company Moderna, we're already getting closer to a vaccine for coronavirus. As you can probably imagine, no longer having to worry about COVID-19 would take out a significant portion of the stress of a new pandemic. Vaccines themselves usually take around a year to develop, but it's the testing and approval that takes much longer. But with the united efforts of the world focusing on a COVID-19 treatment, we may see one approved by mid-2021. It may sound like that's still far off, but if achieved, it will be the fastest a vaccine has ever been developed. As this New York Times graphic shows, typically vaccines take decades to develop, but this goal would take more than a decade off the timeline. There are already a few vaccines for COVID-19 in the final stages of development, but the success rate for vaccines of infectious and respiratory diseases to be approved after phase 3 trials is about 72%. Statistically speaking, with any luck, that means one of the vaccines already in the final stages should be approved within 12 months from the start of the trial. This stage cannot be sped up as it's meant to monitor and evaluate test subjects during this period of time. There is the option to skip these stages, but that's risky, as the vaccine may prove to be deadly itself, so thorough testing is required. That said, China has already approved a vaccine of their own made by CanSino Biologics by skipping the final stage and using the vaccine for military use. At this point, is it much of a surprise China isn't sticking to the rules? So if another pandemic does come, we'd better hope it comes after we've all been immunized to coronavirus, so we stand more of a chance. If a new pandemic arrives next week though, we could be in for an even bumpier end to 2020 than we ever thought possible. So for all of our sakes, we'd better hope we find a way, and that China keeps its exotic wildlife market shut for good.